If you're a parent, you've probably noticed the world is moving pretty fast, and its ideas are moving right along with it. And if you're like me, you might not be too happy about some of those ideas, especially when you realize they're being forced on our kids at an extremely young age. So, what can we do about that? That's an important question given that we as parents are ultimately responsible for raising our children. Talking to our little ones is a great place to start, and reading to them is a great way to promote discussion. That brings me to a vital resource I want you to be aware of. It's a picture book for readers aged 4 through 9, which introduces the topic of compelled speech to children. Ollie Adamson's Strawberries Are Red, a story about compelled speech, gently introduces this topic and is sure to encourage great discussion between you and your little one. Freedom of speech is essential, and our children should be made aware of this. This book is available on Amazon, and I encourage you to order your copy today. We owe it to our kids. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Clean Libertarian Podcast. And I just want to say I'm sorry for not having any content out to you guys over the last couple of weeks. Had the OKLP convention and just some other life stuff going on. So it's nice to kind of take a little break from this, but I did miss getting content out. And I have a solid episode for you guys today. For those of you who have followed me from Twitter, you know Ace Archist, and I brought Ace on to talk about Ross Ulbricht first off and foremost, because Ace knows this case. He knows it very well, and we were kind of able to delve into it, the absolute miscarriage of justice that is his case and the sentence that he got. And then from there, we kind of talked about like where Ace got into philosophy from. We talked about drug policy, talked about sanctions. We just kind of went all over the place. Ace matches my level of ADD, and I appreciate that in him quite a bit. But so without any further ado, I'm going to bring on Ace. All right, this has been a long time coming. Ace, thank you so much for coming on, buddy. How you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. This is going to be great.
Yeah, I think so too. For those of you unaware, Ace is an undefeated principal scholar on Twitter, just smashing people all day long. One of the things that, and we were talking before the show, one of the things that I will always remember is you going toe to toe with, was he a prosecutor or who was that guy?
He was he was an FBI agent on Ross Ulbricht's case, I believe.
That was beautiful, man.
Yeah.
And you got this way of like quote tweeting people, and that just adds insult to injury, and I love it so much. No, you're working on you do the Slurp Gang pod. How often do you guys do that? Every week?
We do that every week. It releases every Monday. Yeah.
Every Monday you do that, and then also you got the Substack that you're working on. That
yes, man, that is. I've delayed it multiple times now, and I feel so terrible because I've told people, "Oh yeah, it's probably going to be releasing next week," and I've had like other things come up that have kind of pushed it back. But hopefully, I'm going to have that out within the next week.
Bro, this is 2 consecutive weeks I went without having an episode, so like I get it, man. Shit happens.
Yeah.
You know. But the main reason I wanted to bring you on and have you kind of discuss with us is the entirety of the Ross Ulbricht case. An absolute travesty as far as the term justice goes. So I'm just gonna let you kind of steer, and I'll chime in every now and again. You definitely are well equipped for this one.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give like a general overview, and if we want to go into more like specific details, like we can. But basically, for people, if people don't know who Ross Ulbricht was, he's a libertarian who he campaigned for Ron Paul originally, and he got really deep into the liberty movement, as many of the listeners probably have in the past. And he wanted to do something. Like he wanted to do something with his life. He wanted to like not just think about the ideals. He wanted to actualize them. So one of the ways he tried to do that was he wanted to create a website based on the non-aggression principle, which basically states that anyone can freely transact with anyone else as long as they don't initiate force, fraud, or coercion against another person. And in doing so, he created this website, or helped create the website, The Silk Road. And Basically, so by libertarian principles, yes, people were like on the site, people were selling drugs back and forth, but obviously under libertarian principles, this is a perfectly consensual, voluntary transaction. No
Mm-hmm.
matter what someone might think of the use of drugs, it was perfectly consensual. There was no proof that anyone overdosed, in fact, from this. So that was some of the like media smears that came out later on, was that, oh, people overdosed from these drugs, and there's just no proof of that. But basically, to get back to it, um, Ross Ulbricht was arrested for his connection to this website, and ultimately the trial was a huge it was a huge joke. There was everything they brought against Ross essentially amounted to nothing. He was a first time violent offender, mind you. He's essentially charged. He got the kingpin trafficking charge, which is essentially what they give to people like El Chapo, like
Right.
actual like cartel members. So when he was arrested and sentenced, he was found guilty of the kingpin charge, the selling drugs, and like some minor like computer hacking thing, which is very dubious. But anyway, um, essentially, he was charged and sentenced with double life plus 40 years in prison. So 2 lifetimes plus 40.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at sentencing, so basically to kind of address like the elephant in the room with Ross, if you search Ross Ulbricht, you're going to see like people smearing him about, well, he hired hitmen, right? And
Right.
We can either save that for later or we can get into it now. It's your call.
Yeah. We'll say that for later because that ties into
Okay.
the guy. Anyway.
Yes. So at sentencing, I do think this is important to bring up. At sentencing, the judge specifically referenced his philosophy, his libertarian philosophy. And she
Really?
said, yes. So she said that this is a very dangerous philosophy, and I don't think it's one you've given up yet. So she entirely targeted him for his personal beliefs
Wow.
when she was at sentencing, which is an incredible statement. It's an incredible like use of power by the judge. So that's also something to keep in mind, that the state in some sense felt very threatened by Ross, and I truly believe in my heart of hearts that's what led to the sentence.
Wow. Imagine being Ross
Yeah,
sitting there and hearing that your
yeah,
political philosophy. And so he is, and I've heard people call him a political prisoner, but that
yes,
really puts it into focus.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So, let's circle back to that, on the murder for hire
Yeah.
charge. So where did that stem from? How come that allegation was leveled and why didn't it stick?
Yeah. So basically, the murder for hire charge, we have to go back a little bit. So the federal agencies eventually found out about Silk Road, and they essentially, long story short, they kind of were able to infiltrate the site. They were able to access it and kind of get in close with some of the administrators on the site. The administrators on the site were codenamed DPR, Dread Pirate Roberts, which is from The Princess Bride, which is basically a moniker or a pseudonym that gets passed on from one person to the next. So that part is actually kind of very important. So basically, the Dread Pirate Roberts, there was the federal, like the FBI and ATF and these guys who were on the site were able to create a sting operation, essentially, where they entrapped one of the people on the site, Curtis Green, who was a moderator. They were trying to create a transaction of drugs between one person and another person, or between them and another person. And they wanted Curtis Green to essentially be a middleman and facilitate it. And when he accepted this role, he accepted it reluctantly because they were kind of untrustworthy of these people, like with good reason, it turned out. They got Curtis Green and essentially entrapped him because the drugs were mailed to his house and they were able to find his identification. And essentially, they essentially made him fake. They essentially extorted him and made Curtis Green give them access to the administration logs. So they were able to access people's user accounts. They were able to get people's passwords on the site. And from that point forward, they were able to set it up so that they went back to DPR and said, look, this Curtis Green guy, he extorted your money. He stole money from us. And they were able to fabricate it and make him look like he was the one who did this. Who, like, because like the
Wow.
drug deal didn't go through, so they thought, oh well, it had been Curtis Green who stole the money. Oh, and I do have to mention the two FBI agents, Carl Mark Force and Sean Bridges, stole Bitcoin from people on this website. Like, they personally stole Bitcoin, and they're sitting in prison, or they were sitting in prison for like 10 years for this.
For that specifically.
For that specifically, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and they also tried to make it look like Curtis Green did it, because they used different accounts to do it, and they thought, well, Curtis Green was the only one who had access to these accounts, so obviously it had to have been him. So it gets worse. Eventually, they go to DPR on the website and say, look, this Curtis Green guy is a real problem. And using his account, I believe they were trying to say, look, we're going to extort money if you don't pay us, or we're going to rat you out to the feds. That's what they said. We're going to rat you out to the feds unless the DPR and the website gives them a monthly allocation of money. And the feds essentially got DPR to say, okay, seemingly they got him to say, okay, let's do something about this, right? We can't let this guy extort us for money. And that's where the hits seemingly come in, if you believe the chat logs, because all we have are really like chat logs, secondhand chat logs.
And by this point, they have the keys.
Yes.
to the accounts. They could in fact be just talking to themselves.
They could be, yes. That's exactly right. They very much could be. So we don't know, but all we do know is that they made Curtis Green fake his death. They coerced him into doing this. Like, they apparently threatened his family, from what he said. They threatened him if he didn't go along with it. So they took pictures of him like faking his death, like on the ground bloody, and they sent this to DPR apparently, seemingly as to what the chat logs say, if we can believe those. But basically, that's where the hits for hire come in. And people assume, without evidence, that DPR, Dread Pirate Roberts, the admin account, was Ross. And there's no evidence we have to actually back up that was Ross. In fact, we have messages from Ross in 2011, soon after he created the site, saying that to another friend that he stepped away from the site. And we even have other evidence that we can get into later that would show that, yeah, there's multiple reasons why Ross was not the DPR, if we can even believe the chat logs. Because remember, the agents had access to the passwords of the accounts, so there's no reason we have to believe that they could not have accessed those accounts and, just as you said, been talking back and forth to each other.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and they're not above that. If in the process of them doing this, they're actually stealing,
Yes,
and everything else. And I don't mean to sidetrack the conversation, but what was the time frame in between conviction of Ross and the conviction of these agents for what they did?
So they were under investigation for this by other FBI agents when they were on trial, when they were giving their testimony. But the jurors were not allowed to know that they were under investigation for this when they were giving their testimony. So So during the trial, they were under investigation, and I believe they went to prison after Ross was convicted, if I remember correctly. Yeah,
that is shady. So, that whole damn case should have got thrown out just because of that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So what did that appeal process look like for Ross? Because I know he's gone through it a few times, but explain like what needs to happen in order for anything noticeable to happen in this case.
So to my knowledge, unfortunately, at this current time, I believe they've ran out of their appeals. They've used up the amount of appeals they can use. And at the moment, the only real hope we have through the legal process is a pardon from the president, or clemency.
Jesus.
Yeah. And I believe the Supreme Court was on the docket for the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court decided not to hear it, from my knowledge. And that was also a very unfortunate blow. So I think they still could, but it's not who knows when that could happen. And unfortunately, the only thing else legally speaking is a pardon from the president.
And that ain't going to happen with this one.
Yeah.
And yeah. So you got Trump, who was, pardoning rappers and weird shit like that,
Yeah,
but
and
wouldn't look Ross's way.
with Trump, I just want to say with Trump, because there was a story that came out that got people really excited. Is that there was a story from, I think, the Hollywood Reporter or Deadline or one of those outlets that said Ross Ulbricht was on the docket on Trump's potential pardon list. Like that was like Ross was on Trump's potential pardon list before he left office, and people got like, even myself included, got like cautiously optimistic about this because it's like, hey, this might be the last one of the last chances for Ross, and we might as well hope against hope that this happens. And then it turned out it didn't, and that was very disappointing for many.
Yeah, and Ross's mom, what's her name?
Lynn Ulbricht.
What an absolute gem of a human being.
Yes.
That woman. Go ahead.
She's a hero. No, she's an absolute hero. Like the amount of strength that woman must have is just incredible.
Yeah, to not only go to bat for your son, but to be told you're a horrible person in the process.
Yeah.
You're a terrible parent and your son deserves to rot in prison. Like that woman still shows up to the occasion every single day.
Yes.
What, have you gotten to meet her or talk to her?
Unfortunately, I have not. I have not gotten to meet her. That would be it would be an amazing experience if I ever did, because I would just want to thank her. But no, unfortunately, I've never met her.
And because I know she goes to a lot of our respective liberty events around the country. I would love to meet. I would love to have her on the show to talk about this more. But I want to kind of and I know, dude, look, ADD, right?
No, yeah, I completely get you. I completely understand.
But I want to go back to the interaction that you had with one of the agents that was involved in the case, right? Yeah. So like when you were talking to him, he was saying that he had IP addresses and all of this and that. Of the evidence that he presented, like, what did you make of any of that?
I mean, ultimately, nothing he said to me was of it. So to give a little background, I got into a Twitter argument with a former FBI agent who worked on Ross's case. This happened a few months back. And basically we had this little back and forth, and the evidence he tried to present to me that he was trying to argue that Ross was guilty and this was Ross. He was saying, well, no, we have IP addresses, which obviously, there's no way you can be sure of an IP address, right? Even like, especially given what happened to the computer. So I should talk about what happened to the computer. They arrested Ross in a library and they grabbed his computer, and essentially when they grabbed his computer, and they inserted a USB drive to try to extract as much information as possible. And this is how they found the DPR files. And they also had, so from Ross's perspective, from Ross's, what he said is that Ross had been working in the background of the site. Like when there was a problem, he would go on the site and try to help people. But other than that, he was essentially like offline. He was not a part of the site. So so they were across the street from a library, and they asked Ross to log in. And once Ross logged in to the Silk Road website, he was arrested. They grabbed his computer. Once they grabbed his computer, they essentially like messed it up in some way, right? So they took the computer. One of the FBI agents tasked with working on the computer and extracting files, was having a difficulty extracting files, so they took it to a third-party private agency to do it. And the third-party agency, this business or this company, essentially accidentally crashed the computer when they were doing it. And the files, so they crashed like the hard drive of it, like the RAM. And so there's, even if you accept that, the fact that, okay, these files were on the computer, there's no way to verify that the files on the computer came from Ross. All we know is that seemingly on the computer, there were 5 DPR log files, which doesn't prove that it was Ross. It just proves that of the DPRs, they all shared the same like file, right? They all shared like a same log.
Right. And if he's working on the site, like he would have that.
He would have administrator access. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it doesn't prove that Ross was the DPR. It just proves that he had access to the DPR account, right? Multiple people could have had access, and there's there's evidence that multiple people did. So there was a secret handshake on the site, right? So some of the DPRs got friendly with the users of the site, and eventually some of the users concocted this secret handshake that they would ask the DPR to distinguish which DPR it was, because the users understood that there were multiple DPRs and not all of them were the same. So one user of the website would ask something like, okay, they would say like any good books to read, and the DPR, if it was the same DPR, would say anything by Rothbard. Okay, that was the secret handshake. Now, when around the time that this happened, one of the users asked the question and the DPR didn't know how to answer. So that seemingly shows that that probably wasn't the same DPR. So we do have evidence that there were multiple. Curtis Green, the man who was set up by the FBI to essentially take the fall here, he even says, yeah, there were multiple DPRs. I was one of them at one point. so you have all this reasonable doubt that should have been admitted to evidence. And apparently, from what I understand, the jury was not allowed to hear that evidence that there were multiple DPRs. So
really?
throughout the whole trial, it was basically framed as if Ross was the DPR. And that's it. Now, I do have to say, I do have to go back and clarify something. Ross was never actually indicted for the hitman charge. Like, the hitman charge was not a thing. The hitman accusation, I should say, only came up to deny Ross bail at his bail hearing, because he was a dangerous threat. That's when it was brought up. It was not brought up like actually in trial. It was casually thrown around a couple times in the trial, which should have been like objected to, and that should have gotten thrown out. But I don't believe it was. But he was never actually charged. Like, the jury never indicted him on that charge, because that charge was not present.
See, I thought that it made it to the floor of the case. You followed this a lot, obviously closer than I ever did, but I didn't know that it never even made it.
Yeah, no, it never. Floor. Right. Yes, it was just it was originally charged, but it was never like brought to trial.
Wow, man! And what boggles the mind is that it still is ever present in a lot of the detractors.
Yeah, if you search Ross Ulbricht, it'll probably be one of the first search results is that he was a hitman, or he hired hitmen, right? That's what everyone believes. That's what everyone understands, because that's what was rolling around in the media at the time. But there's no evidence that was actually Ross, and there's evidence to suggest reasonable doubt that it was Ross. So
wow,
yeah, it's messed up. It's so messed up.
Yeah, that just makes me ill. So if that's what you're seeing when you're on Google, imagine any, especially president's administrator or interns or whoever that does case research on these potential pardonees or whatever the hell you'd call them. Yeah. That's probably what they're pulling up and seeing. Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is disgusting, is what that is, man. Now, in terms of this case, I don't know if how there's big cases that, especially once the sentence gets handed down, and a couple years down the road, a couple jurors are like, man, I really don't think that I went the right way on that. Has there been anything along those lines with the jurors who were present in this case?
I don't think so. I've never seen anything from the jurors. I think they've been like understandably kept from like public eye. Right. I've never seen, I've never seen a story where any of them have come forward to talk about it.
Okay. Well, I got a wife that listens to nonstop murder docs and true crime shit. And it's just a question that I had that I knew she'd be wanting me to ask. Man, just thinking if you're Ross and you're sitting in prison, and just to get that close because you surely he knew that he had made it to the docket.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
talk about abysmal, man.
And to talk about Ross in prison. So this is like adds insult to injury, right? The double life plus 40 is already bad, but for a long time, Ross was in a supermax prison, which means that, for people who don't know, that means he was in there with the worst murderers, like child rapists, and with the whatnot. Yeah, he was in there with those people, and Ross was never Ross was a first time, he was a first time offender, all nonviolent charges. So Ross has never acted violently in his life, and he's in there. He was in there with the worst of the worst.
Yeah,
And
not just the state supermax, but like federal. Like you
yes,
had to be bad, real bad.
yeah, yeah. So like Lynn Olbert, Ross Ulbricht's mother, tells a story how Ross was in prison and there was a group of prisoners who wanted him to assault another person in the prison as like an initiation, and Ross refused to do it because Ross said, no, it's never acceptable to initiate violence on another person, right? Uh, so Ross still holds to that philosophy, and they had to put Ross in solitary confinement because he was in danger because he would not essentially like get in with the crowd because he
Mm.
was in danger from the other prisoners because he refused to actually attack other prisoners. So he was seen as kind of a target there because he was not willing to play ball with them.
Talk about a fish out of water, dude.
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, I've been to jail. I've never been to prison. Been to jail
Hmm.
quite a few times, and it's not. Yeah, for a computer nerd, that is not the place to be. That
Yeah,
is not the place to be at all. Damn. Well,
it's
man,
just sad.
yeah, it is sad. I appreciate you talking about that, and because that, like I said, I wanted to get that on the podcast so I
Yeah.
could reference it back to. But I also wanted to talk about you, man. Like, who is Ace? Like, how did you get into this whole theory and stuff? Because, like, dude, I mean,
Yeah.
you are up there among the
Oh,
great
thank you.
liberty thinkers, in my
Oh,
opinion.
thank you. I so I kind of got to start because like I came from like a sort of a Republican background, and basically Fox News was on a lot in my house, and I eventually was lucky enough to find this person on Fox News, Judge Andrew Napolitano, and he was kind of like my break point, my break-in point to libertarianism. Through him, I found people like Tom Woods and Ron. Like I always knew of Ron Paul, but I didn't really get deep into Ron Paul until like Andrew Napolitano like talked about him and stuff like that. So he was kind of my jumping off point into this whole thing. And I guess from there, I found Tom Woods, Scott Horton, Michael Malice, all these other people. And that eventually kind of just led me to Twitter. Eventually, I kind of lurked Twitter before I joined Twitter, but that is essentially how I joined Twitter. And obviously from Tom Woods beforehand, going back a little, I found, Rothbard and absorbed just like for a couple of years, at least I absorbed every single piece I could of libertarianism because it was really, really interesting to me. And that sort of just like, it was sort of like a domino effect from there, I guess.
Interesting that you came
Yeah,
from Republican roots because you do not lean right on a
no.
lot, a lot of your stuff.
Yeah. So even when I was like came from Republican roots, I really never like jived with like Republicans and like culturally speaking, you know what I
Right.
mean? But it was still, yeah. So it's a sort of little happy accident, I guess.
Happy accident. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So, some of the best arguments I see you make, and that's the ones that I can follow along with. Because to be honest, man, like shit, I struggle when it comes to economics and especially
That's very
geopolitics.
understandable. That's
Oh
very
man,
understandable. Yeah.
it's tough. But when it comes to drug policy, like you have some very interesting takes, and they're always directly in line with kind of what I'm thinking on it. Um, how do you think this conversation gets shifted? Like, how do we dispel this myth that reversing drug policy will be the downfall of society as we know it?
I think a lot, I think there's actually something we can use in the same way that, like how gay people were treated and how they are now, which is like, oftentimes being gay was sort of demonized, right? There were ad campaigns against like, gay people or like child predators or some shit.
Yeah.
This is an actual thing. And still see the same thing like with marijuana, right? Marijuana was like the devil's cabbage or something, right? It was just
Right.
like
Right.
insane things. So I think just like the more people who have family members who might be like who smoke weed or even harder drugs, it makes it hard. If they're a family member of yours, it makes it harder for you to like unequivocally say this person should be in prison, right?
Right.
Like, I think the more people who know people who use drugs, and it makes it harder to like say, yeah, this person should go to prison, right? And I think more people should understand what prison means. It's not, some place where they're going to get better. It's not some place, right? Because oftentimes what we see is when people go to prison, they often, even if they're a good person going in, they're going to come out more violent, because then oftentimes that's what you need to do to survive in prison. Often you need to become more violent. So you're right. You once you understand, like Stefan Molyneux, who kind of went down a pretty bad path, but I think I think he did have some good arguments, which is like the against me argument, right? Which is whenever you're having a conversation with a person and you're being cordial, you're being very respectable to them, you should always, like, especially if you're in person, look them in the eye and say, do you think I deserve to be sent to prison by men with guns who will shoot me if I resist, if I ingest drugs, right? And oftentimes most people do not have the gut to say yes to you, right? Like staring, like looking you in the eye. And I think that's often a very good way to like debate people, which is say, okay, let's try to bring it out of the theoretical as much as possible. It's just you and me here talking. Do you think men with guns should violently send me to a cage if I disagree with you? If I don't think that I should be sent to jail, if I don't think I should be sent to prison for ingesting drugs?
That's a good point, man, because there really is a disconnect, that happens, especially when we talk about theory and whatnot.
Yeah. Wow. If you can like bring it out of that theory realm, that because a lot of people, right? I found a lot of people, they can get lost in theory and they can get like kind of emotionally detached from it oftentimes. And I think if you can bring it down to a human level, is say like, no, when you're advocating these policies that drug people should go to prison, what you're doing is you're saying that these kids who either sell drugs or do drugs, by kids, I'm saying like 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, these people who like maybe poor, maybe they're impoverished and that's their only way out of poverty. You're going to tell me that these children should be sent to prison and lose like years of their life, not just years of their life, but opportunity within those years, because they ingested something that you don't like, or they sold substances that will be just ingested voluntarily by other parties that you don't like, right? That's what someone is advocating for when they're saying people who use or sell drugs should go to prison.
Yeah, you're talking about a state-sponsored generational curse on somebody for being, oftentimes it really is in a different economic position, socioeconomic status than somebody who went to college and did all the good or whatever.
Right. And after they get out of prison, it's going to be even worse for them, because now not only were they went in poor, they tried to escape poverty by selling drugs because they were poor. When they get out, it's going to be even harder for them to find work, because being to prison is like a scarlet letter. Right.
Yeah.
After you've come out of prison, it's much harder to find work. And then because it's much harder to find work, then those people are more likely to commit crimes because they can't find work to sustain themselves.
Man, look, so I work at a outpatient facility, and what we do is kind of we're integrated substance abuse, mental health.
Yeah.
So like there's all different types of departments. We have a housing department, and there is stories of people who had a distribution or trafficking charge 20 years ago, and they are denied housing on a regular basis. Not housing from the state, mind you. This is housing on their own dime. They cannot get a lease because of that.
Yeah, it's
crazy.
It's so messed up. Yeah.
It's crazy. And you look at that and you're like, well, what other option does this person have at that point?
Right.
It's kind of like what we're seeing, in Russia right now with all these sanctions being thrown down. You put people in a corner, they're going to react inadvertently. They're going to lash back out, and rightfully so.
Yeah, it's completely understandable, like why they the Russia thing is so mind-boggling to me, because there's it's this collectivist mentality where it's like, okay, this person, this oligarch, Putin in another country, aggressed against the civilians of Ukraine. So now we're going to aggress against the civilians of Russia, because for some reason that means, an eye for an eye in their, I guess, messed up minds, right? It's like, it's like they're just trying to spread suffering. They're not trying to stop the harm.
Yeah. And so the thing is that like, you're talking about doing this to a populace that is nestled directly in the shadow of a tyrant. of
Yes.
another tyrant of the world.
Right.
It is, and you've also cut off any outside news sources now. You've shut down social media. It's not going to be that hard for Putin to say, see, the rest of the world is against us.
Exactly.
I am your savior. I'm your only way out of this.
So sanctions have never worked historically, like not even in the way that all the people who propose sanctions want them to work, right? So the whole idea is that, well, and it's an evil idea on its face, but it'll say, well, we're going to hurt the civilian populace so that they're going to rise up and oppose their own leader because they're starving. It's like, one, that's never happened. Often, like if a person is starving to death, do you think that they're going to like amass some revolution, or they're going to be able to amass some revolution? No. Like in theory, that may work in your head, but that's historically never happened. All that happens is it breeds resentment, and it makes it so that they want a strong man to pull them out of the place that they're in, right? And you can also bring this back to World War II. World War II happened because the Treaty of Versailles screwed over the German population to such an extent economically that they said, yeah, we hate this. We hate this right now, and we want someone to bring us out of it. And, we all know what happened then. So this never works, and it's also evil to this is also something like you can talk to people about, like with using the against me argument, which is that, do you think I should be punished for something I didn't do? Right. And most people will say, well, no. Okay, if I'm Russian, if I was born in Russia, should I be punished for something I didn't do? Right. And you can kind of get in that way. And it's like some people might say, oh, I've never thought of it that way. Right. So you can kind of you can kind of get through to them like that.
And it seems like, especially post-COVID, the age of rational thought is gone.
Yeah.
Like critical thinking is no more. And I mean, it's a trend that's been happening for a while, but dude, it's real bad. You're watching sides just shift on a dime. Republicans act real high and mighty because they're like, oh, we would never go to war with Russia. But like they're pretty I
mean, Romney in 2012 was
Romney, exactly. And not even that, but like, hell, when Trump was in office, they were flirting with the idea of going toe to toe with China.
Yeah.
And still,
like none of these sides have a moral high ground to stand on.
Not at all.
Not at all. They just,
And so, and we're just going to go on an ADD trip down the line here because goddamn, I can't stay on a topic to save my fucking life. But
no, I'm totally there with you. I get it,
dude. So
I mean, to a certain point, it's all interconnected. Like all of the you can kind of all of these things are kind of interconnected, so it's easy to get go down these trails. They're not. It's not necessarily like they're just you're grasping at straws by making these connections.
For sure. And while we're talking about people shifting around and stuff, the reason that I have such a hard time finding my niche in this, and I don't think I have a hard time finding my niche. I think it's finding commonality when I talk about like drug policy and ending the war on drugs, is that one side of the aisle wants to incarcerate rather than treat. The other side of the aisle wants to treat, but they also want to couple that with occupational licensing. So
yes.
It's just like
it doesn't get rid of the problem. It just kind of shifts it. Yeah.
At all. And depending on who's in power will depend on what that conversation, because both parties will talk about ending the war on drugs, the campaign on it, this and that, but their implementation of their idea of that actually ends up creating more harm for the people that they propose to want to save.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's like, if you want to say that, well, we don't want these drugs on the street. It's like, okay, they don't. For one, there's an obvious economic argument that the more you artificially constrain something, it's just the demand doesn't go away. All that happens is now you raise the price of the good in demand because there's a lower supply.
Exactly.
Right? So this and because of that, the high cost or price associated with it, that's just going to attract some nefarious characters to it, right? And this is how we get cartels, obviously. Like
Yeah.
if someone wanted to end cartels, or they wanted to end the scourge of cartels in Mexico, let's say, what you would do instantly is, okay, we're going to legalize all drugs tomorrow. No occupational licensing, because those are just legal cartels. And we're just going to say, okay, we're not going to do this at all. And now all of these cartels would immediately like vanish practically, or they would have to find some other work. An example of this was like, it was crazy because I was arguing with some person who apparently didn't get it. And I said, okay, I said, okay, if you want to end cartels, just legalize drugs. And they came back with say, oh yeah, well, I mean, if you look at marijuana now, yeah, they aren't selling marijuana, but now they're selling cocaine or all these other drugs because they can't make a profit on marijuana. It's like, yes, you're agreeing with me, because marijuana is now more legal. They have to move on to other substances. So now if you legalize those substances, they won't be able to make a profit on those substances. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. The other part of it too is, the only areas that you see like kind of black market marijuana going on in states that have legalized or at least gone medicinal is states that impose high taxes, high licensing, like I think, what is it? Florida's like, I had someone on talking about this, and like the Florida board that determines who gets to grow weed, they only hand out like a handful of licenses across the entire state.
Yeah.
So obviously, the black market's still going to happen there because government's still getting in the way.
And also, you always have to remember, licenses are just like they're cartelizing. They're saying which the state is saying, okay, these specific companies or these specific people are allowed to sell under these specific conditions. So it's just essentially going from an illegal cartel to a legal cartel, right? So it's the same problem is really still there, just in a different form, a slightly different form.
Yeah, big time, man. Yeah, the only difference between the Mexican cartels and our government is one has a fancy Oval Office.
Right, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Straight up, man. Yeah,
and our CIA has actually smuggled cocaine into impoverished areas, right?
Yep.
Like that's a thing that happened. So it's like, it's some people who might roll their eyes at that comparison. It's like, no, our government has literally smuggled drugs into areas in America.
Yeah, big time, man. The whole School of America's thing, like that whole the Gary Webb.
Yes.
Dude, there's a lot to unravel there. There's a lot to go over and look at. And at the end of the day, the government's not really, it makes clear a point that the government's real problem with legalizing is the fact that they don't have any more, what do they call that? When you can dangle something over somebody's head, like blackmail sorts. When it comes to drug policy across the globe, like that's how they get their leaders into place. That's how they keep this going. But on the other side of it too, they will also use those very same drugs to push these policies on a global scale to actually fund their black ops. Yeah, it's a shady thing, man.
Right. And the idea that, a lot of the drugs that are prescribed, like officially prescribed, can do more harm to you than drugs you can buy on the black market. Yeah. So the idea that it's about keeping people safe, that's just bullshit, because obviously we can see the prescribed drugs right now, you can get prescribed fentanyl now, and that will like kill a person, right? So the whole idea about, we're just trying to keep people safe, that narrative is just like completely false, and we know it's false, and it's just, there's no debate about that.
Yeah, the weird thing is that people don't really know that fentanyl has been around for a long damn time. Yeah. And it's not like they really only think it's an illegal narcotic, like it's a street level drug, but no, it's in every hospital across the country.
Yes.
I mean, it is a number one painkiller that they use. They use that quite often. Yeah. It's just insane to me. But the other part of it too is that, like the prohibitionists will talk about, we have to think for the kids. We don't want kids getting on drugs. We have to keep these drugs illegal. Going back to your pharmaceutical argument, dude, we have kids on speed everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
everywhere. It's prescribed speed.
Right. And the same people who talk about, well, we have to, protect the children are also feeding their children very unhealthy food every day, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, and it's not to say that it's a bad thing that you're trying to keep your child healthy, but there's a disconnect here, right? It's
Right.
like
Right.
you're not being consistent. And also the fact that the whole idea that, well, we want to keep our child healthy and then so therefore we need to ban drugs is kind of a non sequitur, right? Because you can keep your child healthy without banning drugs in the first place. So there's a disconnect. You don't need, there's not, right? So the fact that some bad thing could happen does not mean, well, therefore we need to make it illegal. Because every bad thing could happen, but we don't like make every single possible thing illegal, right? Someone could have some child could and do have peanut allergies. We don't therefore say we need to ban peanuts.
Right. Yeah. No, it's crazy. The logic being used is just insane. So I'll kick this question to you, Ace, and before we wrap up. Just, it seems like the common problem that we face, especially those of us who've kind of like red pilled and stepped outside of that system and are able to see this for what it is. How do we break through that fog, right? Like, how do you see this going within the next 5 years or so? Are we gaining ground or are we losing it?
I think we're definitely gaining ground. I mean, if you look at marijuana legalization, like, yeah, it's not great in the sense that it's not where we would prefer it to be, whereas like full decriminalization, no licenses. But certainly it's going in the direction of, okay, less people are now going to be put in prison for marijuana. Marijuana at one point, and it's still federally a Schedule 1 drug, which means it's up there with like heroin, which is just insane. But anyway, it's still going in the direction that, because it's at least being legalized, and it's not, as I said, it's not great because it's not decriminalization. But anyway, less people are now going to go to prison for marijuana use, and that's a good thing. I do think ultimately that will be the trend for other drugs, because ultimately I don't think it's something they can stop, right? They can only like, and I don't mean to like diminish how bad this is for some people, but some people do are going to prison for like selling drugs, but ultimately they can't stop the use of or the selling of drugs. They can only stop some people from selling those drugs. So they ultimately can't stop it. So I ultimately think it is eventually going to be unenforceable just due to the cost of enforcement. Because, you have all these, even police forces will say, yeah, we arrested like 10 famous drug dealers in our town and 20 more popped up the next day, because they can't stop that economic incentive, right? So it's just, they can't stop the ultimate like use of this. So ultimately it's unenforceable. They can't enforce it. So I do think economically it will go away. And I do think what I said earlier, which is just saying, like, talking to the average person about it's like saying, okay, let's say I used heroin, right? Obviously, we would all understand this would be very bad for me if we were in a standard of like bodily health. Okay. Now, and talking to the other person here, the imaginary other person, and you just ask them, okay, do you think I should be sent to prison for decades because of what I did? And most people will not have the strength to tell you yes. They will not have it in their gut to say, look you in the eye and say, yes, violent men should take you to prison. And I think having more of those interactions will ultimately help change people's minds. I also think it all comes down to like bodily autonomy. You either believe that a person has the highest claim to their life or they do not, right? That is a true dichotomy right there. You either have the highest claim or you don't. It's a yes or no. So I think kind of once you kind of put it in that framework, it's like, okay, no matter what you think I do to my body, I either have the highest claim to do it or I don't. Simple as that.
I like that, man. I like that a lot. Ace, as always, man, you got the words, you got the words to say, and you got that powerful approach that I'm actually going to try, because that's not something that I've used. I do the recovery thing, so I talk about my own journey, and that's what I can speak from. But I think that there is a high level of that disconnect, like I said, happening in a lot of these people's minds. So, Ace, brother, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. And
absolutely,
this was a pleasure, man.
Oh no, yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was great. Any chance I get to talk about Ross or just anything, liberty wise, I love. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Anytime. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at ace_archist, and that's where you'll find me most of the time.
Yeah, causing all sorts of hell, man. I love
Yes.
it. Keep doing what you do. All
Oh,
right,
thank
brother.
you. Yeah.
Well, anytime. I know you got your own show, Slurp Gang. Where
Gang,
can people
yes.
find that?
So Slurping is, if you go to my Twitter, Slurping is nothing like my Twitter. It's more just very much laid back, like just shooting bullshit type stuff. But you can find that on pretty much any podcatcher, Slurp Gang.
Right on, man. Well,
Yep.
get that Substack out, and I'll push it on the show for sure.
Yes. Thank
All
you.
right. All right, brother. Well,
very
you
much
take it easy,
appreciated.
man.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right, bye. There you have it, man. Like I said, Ace is just a great voice for liberty. The man knows his stuff when it comes to theory and principle. And if you are on Twitter and you're not following him, you're missing out. The man does a lot of debating. I'll say he does not shy away from a fight. That is for sure. And I've also been able to learn quite a bit about theory because I'm gonna be real honest with you guys. Unless it's a Star Wars book or something recovery related, I really struggle sitting down and cracking open a book. But I can follow along with those tweets and kind of like pick up some stuff here and there. So once again, Ace, brother, thanks a lot for coming on, and thank you guys for sticking with me for 2 weeks. Sorry, I took a little bit of time off, and just a heads up, coming up in May, I'll be in Reno. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. I probably should reiterate that the Sober Caucus will, in fact, have a hospitality room in Reno. Guys, this is it. It's huge, man. There's going to be a place for people who do not want to be around the drinking or, any kind of narcotics use that may or may not be present, and just hang out and with like-minded individuals, and they will have a place to do so. So if you're going to Reno and that sounds like something you want to be a part of and just hang out with us, like, holler at me, drop me a DM on Twitter, reach out to the Facebook page. We would love to see you, love to hang out with you. And I will see you guys there. And we'll just transition into the song of the day. This is Big Wig, and the song is called Falling Down. This is just a great punk rock tune that I think is suitable for whenever we are watching our society collapse around us. And anyway, here is Big Wig.
Sometimes I don't feel very free. Now I am falling down, 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 and the system is falling down, down, down. I am falling down. Your freedom, but they take away your rights. The ones they use, they try to abuse, no matter how hard we fight. And I am falling down, 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 and the system is falling down, down, down. I am falling down. So stop the hate. Stop the fighting, we're all dying. Stop the preaching, stop the teaching. Hold together, make this system better.